The way they do it at the 11th hour is they increase the revenue estimates. I mean, it's really, you know, it's a legal budget. Is it comprehensive? Is it realistic? No, as we all are finding out. You know, again, as responsible for estimating revenues, I have to be realistic. I mean, you just can't, you know, tell the departments if they have some money to spend if they really don't. And so I would not say that we're conservative, because it's not. It's important to be, you know, if you're conservative and revenues continually come in higher every year than what you're budgeted, you know, is that really doing the city good? You know, it's best to be as realistic as possible with your revenue estimates. Proper collection measures. This is dealing with code enforcement violations, parking fines. The city definitely is stepped up on that type of collection to ensure that, first of all, you know, what violations are taken care of, and the revenue is coming in also. Strategic investments. This really hits on the grants, and looking for opportunities in which we can leverage our money for improved economic development, which will bring in hopefully more sales and property tax down the line, and being able to strategically leverage the funds we do have to get grants. Any questions on that?
What does the city do with if it was overestimating an item? Is it going back to the
I'll talk about that a little bit more, but let me answer your question now. Obviously, staff monitors revenues and expenditures on a monthly basis, and then we report to the council on a quarterly basis. And then we do a pretty major review at mid-year and take it to the council and make any adjustments. They will take action to make any adjustments if necessary. So staff is monitoring it really closely on a monthly basis. So you're getting a pretty good idea the first 4 or 5 months into the year if your estimates are accurate or not. So if they're not, I mean, obviously, if there's you know, changes, and there could be, you know, a variety of reasons why you might have to revise your revenue estimates. You know, something could be happening at the state level. Usually an economic downturn is a little bit more, you know, spread out, but there could be a variety of reasons why you might look at changing your revenue estimates. Might be a development project coming into town, and you might be seeing additional planning fees or zoning fees that, you know, timing changed on development. So, but we look at it very closely and update the council.
I'd like to just add a quick one. I think the revenue estimates, especially for sales tax, property taxes, it's not going to be romantic. What we do is we're very thorough and we look at everything. We basically try to project a year out. So we make notation of all the businesses that we have. We have quarterly reports that we receive on how they're performing from a sales tax perspective. And then we also try to anticipate whether some of those businesses are going to continue to produce at the level that they're producing. Obviously, you have to be in tune and know what's going on nationally, especially if you have national retailers. And you have to know what they're doing, because that helps you either forecast and so you don't overestimate or underestimate sales tax revenues. Gas stations, the same thing. Now that you're all going to be filling up in Temple City, we can project, you know, a 2% growth in those areas. But I think it's important that you know that is one of the things that goes in. We have to really take that into consideration. The other thing that you have to be mindful of is that even though we get $1.6 million in sales tax, we have a couple of big anchors, which are Kmart and TJ Maxx, that are, and also the gas stations that really pull a lot of that money in. So if we were to lose one of those anchors in the middle of the year, you can bet your bottom dollar we would go right back to the council immediately and tell them, look, we're losing this major sales tax producer. We need to either adjust the budget or through the economic development policy, the reserve budget policy that's in place. Are you going to go over the numbers and the safeties later?
I'm going to go over
Okay, good. I think they'll explain to you what the other options that the council has given us to not have to do that. But if you do lose your biggest sales tax producer like El Monte did when they lost all their autos, then they basically had to start cutting immediately because they knew what that meant. So
Yes.
I'm just curious, what is the turnaround time on getting the sales tax from the Board of Equalization?
Okay, so for example, okay, let's take the January to March quarter. Okay, so that's actual sales. So each business has to report their sales activity in the following quarter, and I think they have to do it within the 30 to 45 days. So, you know, you do your sales, if you're a business owner, you do your sales tax report, send it up to the state, and mail your check. And then the state processes it, so then we get it into that following quarter. So it's about a 3-month lag of actual sales.
And you get it quarterly rather than...
We actually get it monthly, but the way they do it is they, like for January to March sales, we'll see the money in July and August. And what they do is the State Board of Equalization will estimate it and what they think we're going to, and then they'll give us 2 months of an estimate, and then they'll do what they call the cleanup payment in that 3rd month. So we do get, you know, we get cash flow coming in monthly. It's a little different if they do that cleanup.
Does the Franchise Tax Board monitor or audit businesses, I mean, to make sure that they pay their
Yes.
fair share?
Yes, that
How do they
is-
do that?
They go in and do sales tax audits. Yeah, that's their jurisdictions. They're the agency that has the authority.
I see.
Yeah. In fact, you know, it's interesting, the State Board of Equalization, you know, members, you know, the board, I think there's 5, and they cover different areas of the state.
Mhm.
And sometimes if you hear about, they'll often have local meetings about sales tax information.
Right.
And just that general policy questions and stuff like that. And it's actually pretty interesting. I mean, and through my professional organizations and stuff, we'll oftentimes have the board member of our area come and speak to us about all that stuff, how they process it. Okay, city investments. We are governed by state law on how we can invest our money. And it's pretty strict, and it actually, for example, we can't have an investment that's any longer than 5 years. Like, we cannot invest in a 30-year government bond. We used to. When I first started out my career, so it must have been about 28 years ago, I don't know if any of you remember this, but the city of San Jose went through some drastic problems because of their investment policies. And basically, you know, they were investing in 30-year bonds, and that fluctuates with the market, and they needed to liquidate some of their bonds, and you know, the bonds were underwater, and so they've lost quite a bit of principal. So it was that action, or that debacle, for lack of a better word, that's when the state came in and insisted, or basically changed the law and said local governments can't go out any more than 5 years. It also mandated some quarterly reporting of investments to the state, some other regulatory things. We do have a
5-minute break?
5-minute break? Oh, yeah. I'm like
Okay.
getting going here.
Where do you go?
Do you want me to finish investments and then we'll do a 5-minute
Sure.
break? Okay. Who knew I could talk so long about finance? Okay, so the city has it as an investment policy that is reviewed and adopted annually by the council as part of the budget process, so we'll be doing that in the next meeting. The city can invest in government agencies, insured CDs, and government investment pools are sort of the major plots. But again, no longer than 5 years. We can invest in some medium-term commercial paper, medium-term notes, corporate notes, if they have a certain rating, you know, like AAA. I personally don't do that. I think we look at them, and we certainly would consider them, but you know, I think the market's just a little. I think we're still in the unsettled market, both for, you know, our corporations, and so I think it's better to be safe. Our current return on our investment portfolio is only 0.58%, which is horrible. But since I've obviously reviewed the investment policy or investment portfolio that we have, and I think there's some ways that we can increase that, diversify a little bit, and without risking any security. Our portfolio right now is about $36 million. So cash flow, you know, is not an issue, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But so, for example, remember when you asked me if we're putting out all this money and it's reimbursement grants? We have 36 million cash in the bank, and when you look at our budget of about 15 million, so in theory, we would spend 15 million in a year. So basically, you know, in theory, if we could get any more revenue in, we could pay our bills for 2 years. So cash flow is not an issue with this agency. So if we ask for reimbursement for a major grant, you know, $1 million or whatever, that we don't get it within a couple of months is not an issue.
Is most of the 36 the reserve money,
About 21 million is in reserves.
and the rest of it is just what?
Is basically your budget.
Okay.
You know, that's your spending plan for the year.
I'm confused on the general fund pie chart, investments is 4%, and this is 0.58. What's the difference between the two?
No, 4% of our revenues. That's not the rate of return. On the pie chart, it's 4% of the general fund revenues. It doesn't represent the rate of return.
Okay,
That's
so,
4% on 36 million.
so what would be some other things that would make up the difference?
Well, 4%.
Just stating it on a different base number.
You say, you
Yeah.
saying 5.8% times 36 million is the total amount of revenue we've received from investment, which represents 4%
Right.
of the total amount of revenue.
Gotcha.
Right, and that's a
Okay.
general,
what you
that's
said?
general, that's very big picture, because those special revenue funds that I talked about, they also, under the law, have to have some interest allocation to their cash balances, so. But yeah, majority of it goes to the general fund. Okay.
Did you just mention that the 36 million is all in cash, that's the investment the city has?
No, it's not all in cash. Well, I say cash in the bank. We have about 26 million is up in a local agency investment fund, which is a state pool that is managed. That's where about 20, and that's considered overnight money, so it's liquid. And that's the area that I want to look at, because there's a County of Los Angeles pool very similar to the state pool that I have experience with, who is showing about a 0.85% return on that, and that's essentially overnight money too. So I'm working right now to get sort of that in place to move that. We also are putting out, we're buying some government agencies that are callable, but basically are guaranteeing unless they're called, about a 1% return. So if we can get some of the funds into some of these higher rate investments that are very safe, well within our policy, well within state law, I think we can pull that up some in the next year.
Do you have more confidence in the county than you have in the state?
Well, you know, that's a really hard, you know, actually I do. Prior to coming here, I worked for a county commission, and so I got more familiar with that county pool. And yeah, the guy that runs that pool is so highly respected. He does a really, really good job. The state, you know, the state can't touch these investment funds, and they basically, you know, they do the same thing. They have huge portfolios and they put it out, but the state fund just hasn't performed as well as the county.
Is there a cap on reserves?
I mean, on reserves.
One of the reserve funds we have, like, is there a cap on it? I mean,
it's all locally decided. So if the council decided to, put a cap on it, they could. But there's no county or state legislation that would cap reserves. It's all that's all
And
local
but
decision.
Temple City, there's no cap. We don't have a policy or.
Yeah, we do.
You do?
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes, after the break. Okay, sorry, guys. Okay, anything else on investments? Okay, if you have any questions about more details and stuff, I'd be glad to talk about it.
Get cold, huh?
We're going to talk about checks and balances, and I think this is, really important that the community is aware of this. I think a lot of times, community is hard, and it's, we certainly take steps to
Should
keep
have turned down the
safe. We are required by state law to have an annual audit by an independent CPA firm annually, just like any other, going concern. And obviously their job is to review our operations and our processes to ensure that our financials are fairly presented. They also evaluate the internal controls, which are essentially the checks and balances, like one person isn't dealing with just the cash, and one person isn't just doing payroll and all those processes. And they look at management practices also. I mean, they look at how the council manages, they look at how the chief executive officer, the city manager manages, and obviously the finance people, they really try to get a sense of the culture of the organization and ensure that things are on the up and up. And then there's been some recent auditing standard changes, actually as a result of Enron, that require that the auditors report directly to the city council on management issues, concerns, so that way, management can't influence what might be going in comments to the city council. So we just recently completed the audit was complete right around the end of the calendar year, but we just took our audit to the council in April and got a great report card. The partner of the audit firm is hands-on and comes out and meets with us and the council, and so there's pretty strong checks and balances.
Is this the first year we've been using this auditor?
Yes, last year was the first year. We're just starting our second year. In fact, they were in this week working on June 30th, 2012.
Is there a policy to change the auditor every 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, there should be, and I haven't gotten that far into the admin policies, but I believe it's council's direction, and it's certainly best practice is that any contractor, especially and auditors too, that you do change them every 3 to 5 years. You go out to bid, and you change auditors every 5 years, 3 to 5 years. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes some agencies just go out to bid, and if their current auditor, submits the best proposal, they'll stay with that auditor. But if you do that, if an agency does that, I recommend that you change the staff of the audit firm that's coming in and looking at your stuff. Change the partner that's in charge, change the manager that's in charge, and so you have a different set of eyes. I really prefer that you change auditors every 5 years. I mean, I think it's much more. It's just good to have somebody come in different from a different perspective, come in and look at your books and what you're doing. Transparency, I think that's number one with this council. We have changed basically our annual financial reporting. We now do what is called a comprehensive annual financial report, or a CAFR, and it is a specific reporting format that is best practice, and a lot of government agencies use this format. It's really helpful when you want to compare one agency to another. The format is similar. So you can really compare apples to apples. If you just do like a basic set of financial statements, information doesn't necessarily, all the information that should be included might not necessarily be included. Also, if you're going to be doing any bonding for your agency or any type of financing, the rating agencies who are going to rate your bonds are going to want to see a CAFR as opposed to just a basic set of financial statements. So again, it's just really, it's best practice. And this last year, the city of Temple City did some CAFRs prior, and then they went for a period of time where they just did basic financial statements. And then last year was the first year again that they started doing CAFRs. Again, in transparency, our budget in brief, we really want to inform the citizens of the financial picture. We want to do it as concisely and user-friendly as possible, so that's why we developed this. We are working on our city website redesign so that it'll be easier to upload financial documents to the website. And we do quarterly updates to the city council on revenues and expenditures. So all that information is public information and is easily accessible on our website. Again, we're trying to make it even more easily accessible.
Tracy, question on the website.
Yeah.
Is there a chance to have a search box?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Good point. Yeah, we are, like I said, we're going through the redesign.
Okay.
And Brian Houseworth has actually had that up, so I will mention that to him. I agree.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what happens if we notice a trend of surplus toward the second half of the fiscal year? What?
Well, that's good. We're glad for that surplus. We wouldn't necessarily like appropriate funds against that surplus because in theory, you got to remember your budget is realistic and you really shouldn't need any more funds to do. So basically, we'll absorb that surplus, we'll go into our fund balance and basically build up our bank account, which is, and that's what, Temple City has done through the years.
You wouldn't consider reducing fees?
That's a policy decision by the council. It's certainly a recommendation that staff would bring forward.
Another question is, what happened toward, almost the last few months? Because I've noticed with the agency that I work with, with the company that I work with, when I realized almost toward the end of the fiscal year, they found that they have more money, which means they haven't really finished spending all that budget they have forecast. So they start to accelerate the spending.
Yes.
And I've seen roads being paved unnecessarily.
Yep, and that is not uncommon in any organization. And I can tell you that Mr. Polito watches that carefully. He doesn't let that happen.
Actually, what we try to do as part of the zero-based budget, we also watch by about the end of May or June, I start meeting with directors already and start, basically if they have a surplus, start telling them, don't spend it unless you absolutely need it. So that actually helps build your reserve. What we're trying to do sometimes is to try to operate off of 11 months of operations, because that's another way of kind of tightening our belt. So at the end of the year, you have a little bit of money left over that you can put away into the reserve. So that's basically our policy and how we operate.
Okay. Yeah, because if you notice, there are those green poles on the Temple City streets. That was a few years ago. I believe we had a surplus. Okay, and then so for some reason they decided to put out those. Those are really matching with our streets. See, the color was just unbelievable.
Those trees were nice trees. They just cut it down and put new trees.
If something is budgeted, is it a license to spend or?
That's a budget philosophy that is not here at Temple City.
Okay,
It's not a license to spend.
very good.
Okay, let's go over this sheet, which is the reserves, okay? And I think I meant to bring it up earlier in the presentation and I just got going, but I'll explain this, and I'll try to tie it into the questions that have come up. So the city council just officially adopted this reserve policy by ordinance. And let me just briefly go over the different categories. So there's 21.7 million that they're setting aside in reserves. And let me just tell you that we have a budget ad hoc committee that is of Mayor Yu and Councilmember Bloom, who are great to work with. They're very detail oriented, which is great for staff. And so they really did a lot of work on this, and then we brought it to the entire council. Okay, so we're proposing $1 million be set aside for emergencies, disasters, and this is to ensure that we can provide essential services during a disaster. And I think the most recent we can think of is the windstorm, and it's just a matter of time that will be dealing with an earthquake also. So that's really important. Again, $2 million for liquidity. This was your issue. If you're doing a lot of construction projects that are going to get reimbursed down the line by federal grants or federal or state grants, you may, you may get to a point, like right now, Temple City is in a great spot. There isn't a liquidity issue, but the council, having the foresight that they do, said, we might not always be in this position. It'd be really good to have a $2 million liquidity. Local economic uncertainty. I'm going to go back real quick to this slide. This one right here, we talked about general fund revenues and how we saw that, that drop in 2008 and 2009. The next one, the local economic uncertainty. So if we see a reduction in sales tax or property tax as a result of kind of what we went through here, the council felt it was prudent to put aside a reserve to ensure that we can continue to maintain services to the city at least through that fiscal year. So that is a good example where we have revenues dropping, and gee, we're in the middle of fiscal year, we really don't want to stop street maintenance or whatever. So we have this reserve that we would be able to sort of plug in there. The next reserve actually, okay, so those three amounts were actually set aside by ordinance, because the ordinance changes your municipal code, it's basically your local law. The next reserve is it's called other post-employment benefits, and a few years ago by a accounting standard, we were required to recognize, do an actuarial study and recognize the liability of the benefits that we have to pay out in the future for our employees. So we had this actuarial study done, and the council is committed, will probably take an action, propose an action in the next month or so to set aside $1 million to start to fund that liability.
Is this considered like unfunded?
Yes.
And what was the actual?
It was about $8 million.
Spread over 30 years.
Exactly.
What is the city budget for this year, last year? It looks like double for last year.
The city budget?
$30 million
Right.
for operating budget for last year.
Yeah.
And you mentioned $130 million, you can have two and a half years of operations. So that's like $50 million for this year.
Right.
Years.
Right.
So is that a 50% cut?
Well, I think, our budget is higher this year, our whole entire budget, because we've got a lot slated for the Rosemead expansion. There's about $10 million that's budgeted this year for that. So, and that's kind of an anomaly, per se. You're not going to have that level of capital projects every year. So we're going to do the whole entire budget. The next item is that we've looked at and recognized is reserves for risk management. This would be a loss, liability, facility loss. We basically have first dollar coverage with no deductibles. So at this time, I didn't recommend to to the council that they set aside any money for risk management. But that's something that could change down the line. The rest of the remaining reserves, the council has designated authority to the city manager to basically come forward on an annual basis with the budget to recommend any changes to these reserve levels. And it's fleet management, facilities management, technology and replacement. That's sort of like your sinking fund for your fixed assets, you know, your buildings and your fleet and information technology. Economic development is $8 million, which is a huge statement, I think, made that the council is making, in that, you know, economic development and developing is continuing to develop a solid tax base is really important to them. So they want funds available to, as opportunities come up for economic development, to you know, leverage funds and public-private partnerships, whatever it may be. They want the resources there to be able to take it, you know, take an opportunity to do some economic projects. And then 4.6 million opportunities for and for one-time expenditures, and again, unforeseen one-time expenditures. Again, maybe other leveraging opportunities. You know, I think the philosophy is, you know, you have to reinvest in yourself, and you have to be able to have resources to put in to programs to improve economic development.
You mentioned the city's recommended zero for risk management.
Mm-hmm.
So is the city self-insured?
We are not self-insured. We are, well, sort of. We're in a joint powers authority with about 120 other cities, smaller cities like our size, contract cities, in California. And so we basically, you know, we pool and they buy insurance. So we're self-insured, you might, well, as the pool has a minimum, or it does have an SIR, but, and then they purchase excess insurance, but our policy with them for both liability and workers' comp basically is zero deductible. So, okay. So that's basically the reserve policy, and how, I'm trying to give you some insight as to how it was developed and why it's important. Gosh, I'm going to give you time. I've talked too long. City losses from the budget has been the redevelopment. I don't know if you've been following that legislation, but the state has basically, you know, shut the door on economic development as we knew it through redevelopment. And cities are being more creative and trying to keep their economic development programs going. We just adopted an ordinance for an economic development program.
On the redevelopment, the 800,000 is the loss of tax revenue,
Yes.
and it's not the loss of the note
No.
or things that won't get repaid.
Correct. But that's still up in the air.
Right.
Yeah, that's not resolved yet, and it probably won't be resolved for a while.
But that's a contingency somewhere else?
No, I don't get into that tonight,
Okay.
but I'd be glad to talk to you one-on-one on that, because that's a little bit more detailed. Okay, so why is the city not volatile like the state of California? Again, prudent financial planning, I think we talked about that. We beat that horse up. Solid, consistent tax basis. I mean, we're a built-out city. We have solid commercial, we have solid residential, and we're not dependent on industries subject to fluctuation like Longo, Toyota, and El Monte, where car sales drop, you know. So that was an example. Another example I wanted to give you is back 10, 15 years ago when, you know, nobody could afford to live in LA, so everybody was moving out to the Inland Empire. Housing, building was just going over the top, and a lot of those cities out there were, their general fund, like 40% of their general fund was dependent on developer fees and building fees, building permits. And for a while that was great, but then when obviously, you know, the housing and the recession and building stopped, all those revenues just dried up. And so there were some cities out in the Empire with some big, big problems. So again, we're in a great position. We are not dependent on one particular industry. We have solid tax base, and a lot of that is because we're a built-out city and we're an older city.
But do we change with the current trends? Like, for example, sales tax. A lot of people are doing it online, buying stuff online. And even this summer, they're actually going to have the sales tax online.
Right.
So, do we get affected by that? Are we enticing like .coms to come here so we can get the sales tax revenue?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that's more the economic development piece. And there's actually a session through this academy on economic development in a few times. And so that's where we're going to address that sort of thing. Because it's sort of a crossover when we're putting our presentation together. It's like, well, I could talk about this, but your example is more in economic development areas. So
Yeah, I feel it's going to increase over time with the
Yes.
sales tax.
well, but they're really starting to clamp down on online sales tax. So I think that week will come around. Okay, long-term financial goals. My personal goals for long-term financial planning for the city is being able to develop operating revenues and operational forecasts for the next 3 to 5 years, and create and develop a more 5 to 10 year capital improvement plan, which will deal with our facilities and some of our more long-term infrastructure needs. So we have a really quick exercise for you. This would be just about perfect. Okay, so this is that pie chart that you saw before. This is the general fund. And so I'm going to have you quickly write down these numbers because I apologize, I should have put them on here and I didn't. Okay, so our general fund total is $11.3 million. One of our total 11.3. And management services represents 1.6 million. Administrative services represents 1.3 million. Community development is 1.7 million. Public safety is 3.7 million. Maintenance is 1.2 million. And community services is 1.8 million. And I added those up, and it does add up to 11.3. So, apologize, I should have had those amounts on there. So, for your exercise now, this is basically what the general fund proposed budget looks like, and this is what we'll be bringing to the council in a couple of weeks. So, does that look good to you? Would you?
Want to see the public safety go down.
Okay, so would you direct,
But with one condition that we don't jeopardize the public safety. So we have to make it more efficient.
so more efficient? So a way you could do that, this is sort of down the line, is we have a contract with the Sheriff's Department that is 3 to 5 years, I'm not sure exactly the term, but 5 years. So at the time that that contract comes, we will have an opportunity to renegotiate.
I have a chance to read the budget from LA County Sheriff's Department. Their budget is like $2.5 billion. They have total employees, including police officers, 18,000 or 20,000. So you divide the budget by that number, it turns out the operating cost for each employee is $133,000. So if you use that $3.7 million divided, it looks like we can have our own police department with less cost. So maybe we can support like a 10, let's say 7 or 8, and it costs like maybe the most, including facility, like more than $2 million. So I don't know if...
But I think are you just looking at the people? What about the facility? Where would we?
For people, let's use the county standard for how they pay the cost. So $133,000, we have 10 employees, so that's 1.3, right? So we have 2.4 left for the facility. So So I don't know if this, then we have to work out with how to save on specifically.
It's good to have something, like this budget doesn't actually state like what the city owns, like, as far as I understand, we own the Temple City Sheriff Station, the building. No. Oh, we don't. Oh.
Nor the library, right?
Yeah, the library's a county building.
Right.
Fire
The
station.
fire station, the county building.
Yeah, we have some residential. I don't know. I don't know the history of that. But,
Okay, so we don't own an apartment, we don't own the sheriff's station. Okay.
you know, maintaining public safety facilities is extremely expensive.
Right.
And you know, you've got to have all the dispatching equipment in there and 911 and, you know, it's.
You
It
can
never
look
closes.
at their operating example, and then you downsize it, instead of county size, you have city, small city, and see how the costs come up. You might
I think
have,
we're benefiting from the economies of scale. On a large LA sheriff, they're able to, it's like buying in quantity. That they can run the sheriff's department at 133,000 per sheriff, but we won't, a smaller unit wouldn't be able to do that.
We can't spread those fixed costs across so many.
If you called 911 and it was our own department, you would not get the response that you get today from the sheriffs that we have today.
I'm sorry, you might get better.
It might be better.
I don't think so.
2-minute response time from past experience, but at a cost of $9 million, 3 times as much. Is it really worth it? That's the balancing act.
so my question is, what do you mean by negotiation?
Negotiation with the public safety agencies and, you know, the 308, police officers associations, and, you know, the council as well. That's what we meant.
I don't know where you need to do it, but I think your city hall and your administration and all your people that work here need a raise and they need more support, and you need to figure it out how you can do that. 'Cause that's where I think you need more people to work more hours and more salary for your city hall people. Because you guys do a fabulous job and you work really hard. And I didn't realize there were so many part-time and what a small staff you really have.
Yeah, we have 36 or 37 full-time employees. Yeah, pretty efficient.
This maintenance, 10%.
Uh-huh.
Does that include replacement of things that are getting old?
Like what kind of things?
Sewers,
No,
water.
no, that doesn't include
Comes
sewer.
out of
We have a
general-
special
The city
fund,
manager?
we have a special revenue fund for sewer maintenance.
So what does that maintenance?
That is like, just a second, I have it.
That was, yeah, we covered it earlier.
Yeah, sorry, that is.
Streets, curbs, the signs.
I need to find my cheat sheet. It's okay, which I probably will. You know what, it's in the budget.
Parks is the senior service, the public transportation service, and the parks and recreation.
Yeah, it's in the budget in brief, actually. So maintenance is facilities maintenance, street sweeping, and traffic signals.
Thank you.
Okay, so now, this is the real challenge. Okay, so we have an $11.3 million budget, and for whatever reason, it could be a bazillion reasons, we have to cut $2 million.
The state of California decides to take funding away from you, and you've already prepared your budget, it's been approved by the council, and now you're short $2 million.
What do you do?
How do you arrange this?
We have to create something that will cover that loss. So I'm thinking of, can a city runs a franchise business?
Franchise business? I don't think so.
Because you're in charter, right? You can, you don't have to follow the state rules.
No, we have an ability to do different things.
Yeah.
If that's one of the ideas that you guys want to.
Something like that, you know.
So you're saying raise a franchise fee, or you could do a utility
Something like that,
tax fee.
you have create job and then at the same time you have profit.
Bring more businesses.
More businesses.
Economic development,
Yes.
right. But you have an immediate problem. So John suggested tap into the reserve, which is a viable option, but temporary. Make sure that you get back on track of living within your means and having a balanced operational budget as soon as you can. And like as soon as you can, because you don't want to you don't want to go a couple of years of digging into those reserves, because then, you know, those will go fast.
You can revisit all the services you're providing.
Right.
And decide whether you want to do street sweeping once a week, or once a month, or once every other month. And
Oh, we still have street sweeping the city?
Yes, we do.
They don't do it in my area.
City.
And we're trying to talk to you guys about
That's what makes our city known.
That's what I mean.
That's a community.
It's going to do it every week, pretty soon.
We have a plan to address that.
Parking. Okay, any other thoughts? I mean, there is no right answer, and I think, you know, local
The other one's
government,
just lay off people.
lay out people, but that, you know, when you come into
Then our
City
city
Hall
won't
to
be
get
so
your
nice.
building permit,
Yeah.
I think creating jobs by creating a new type of business, whatever, you know, to generate profit, that's the best.
economic
You
development.
get profit plus more job for people.
But keep in mind that creating jobs and new development takes time. It takes 1 to 2 years before something's even developed. And then another 6 months to a year to see the property tax and the sales tax start coming in. So you're a year and a half out, 3 years, I'm sorry, before you even see anything coming back.
And probably
Yeah.
some seed money
So I
up
think what the
front.
problem is, you've got to take care of this problem in the next month.
Yeah,
So what goes?
yeah, you know, and that's one option cities have taken, and, you know, this is like a
It can run
realistic,
itself.
this is a realistic scenario that a lot of cities are going through. Yeah, some cities go, just everybody take it, you know, take the 5% across the board in their budget. If you have in-house public safety, you know, they gripe because, oh no, you know, you can't redo your services. So what has happened a lot is the public safety budgets haven't been as severely cut, but what's gone away is park and recreation, library, you know, some of those services that aren't considered essential, which is unfortunate, I think.
In total, you have 80% of everything. Have to figure out where.
Yeah.
You get 80% and you save $2 million. So Wi-Fi access.
Sell Wi-Fi access, become entrepreneurial.
Well, I mean, isn't that where Governor Brown is right now? He's basically saying if he doesn't get some deals by the end of the year, he's got additional cuts he's gonna get. Yeah, so I mean, he's
Yeah, and
already in.
it's gonna be social services and education.
With 5% cut in salary is just it's just small. They
You know-
probably do 20% or more.
You know, I really think that the state, I guess I didn't really realize the significance of the state's problems because, and this isn't a political statement, but I thought that maybe, you know, if anyone should turn around to Jerry Brown just because he has, you know, the history and the political and stuff, and, but he's not turning it around.
But the good source of
gonna be
fund,
interesting.
the good funds from pension, they can do that.
Public safety is the big pension cost.
Because cutting salary is not just a small chunk, symbolic. We're not
Sell the
selling.
apartment.
Huh?
Sell the apartment.
Sell the apartment. You know, I don't know the history of that. I will get that history, you're right, because I need to know that. Okay, it is 2 minutes to 9, so we finished on time. Thank you so much.
One
Thank
last
you.
question I'd like to ask. I don't know if you heard about the Clean Water Initiative in
Yes,
the county?
by the county, yes.
And it was continued for 2 weeks yesterday.
Right, okay, oh, it
So-
was, okay.
Yeah.
So you want to be the county board of supervisors too, huh?
Sometimes, yeah.
Ah,
And
that's real policy.
so the question is, I mean, where does the city stand and how much money would they benefit if it passes?
I think a lot, from my understanding. Councilmember Bloom knows that program because he works with flood control. I think the city will benefit a lot. We currently have a contract that's about $30,000 to address that clean water stuff that it's a mandate that we have to address. And according to Councilmember Bloom, it will benefit the city, and we may be able to take away we may be able to not have to spend what we're doing to clean water. But I don't really know, I don't really know any more of the details than that. We briefly talked about it at our budget study session, or our budget meeting.
And I think the next meeting that we have with Public Works, we'll cover those issues
Okay,
more
good.
more thorough.
Great.
There are a number of issues with NTES and that and that we need to address, so we'll bring those back to you at the next session. Not this one, but the one that deals with community development.
And I'm supposed to announce the next meeting is June 21st, 7 o'clock, and I think it's going to be at the Public Works Yard. That's what I was told today by the community development director.
The city yard.
City yard.
Encinitas?
I believe so.
Roseland and Salinas.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention. I know financial isn't sometimes the most exciting thing. I enjoy what I do.
All right, thank you very much. Well, meeting adjourned next. That's not formality.